I've had a lot of requests to talk about hypermobility and the connection with chronic illness and chronic pain. So, I think this is something that has been common for a very long time. I don't think it's something that's brand new. I think it's just something that we're investigating better and people are getting more awareness about it. So, this can include anything from being on 100% on Ehlers-Danlos diagnoses to just being on the hypermobility spectrum. Some hypermobility doesn't look like hypermobility that you can see on a physical test, but you can have like cervical instability, you can have instability on deeper joints that aren't visible, you can have vascular hypermobility, things that are affecting us inside, not visible on the surface. But it's really interesting that we're seeing more research on this, and it seems like there's this common thread of hypermobility being linked, especially with things like postural orthostatic tachycardic syndrome, mast cell activation syndrome, the autism spectrum, ADHD, chronic pain, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, Chiari malformations and pain in the skull, migraines, all of this. It's really interesting to me. And I've had a lot of clients come up with this recently too. So I really have found that we're getting more recognition in the medical community. And so we are finding out more frequently that this is now a confirmed connection here. So hypermobility, we often see it associated with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or EDS, but there's a lot of connective tissue disorders. There's a lot of people that have hypermobility spectrum disorder. But it gives us a really unique and interesting understanding for the complexities that exist in chronic illness. And sometimes this looks like an increased range of joint motion beyond what's typical. I don't have this very obviously, so I can't demonstrate it the way some people can. But a really typical test would be if you can touch your thumb to your arm when your hand is flat on the table, if your pinky goes up more than 90 degrees, if you have a hypermobile elbow, hypermobile knees, if they kind of hyperextend, if you can put your hands flat on the ground. Those are kind of like the Baton score testing, but it goes deeper than that. You can have hypermobility and not meet all of those criteria as well. And it not only is something that affects that visible musculoskeletal system, but also autonomic nervous system regulation and immune function, a lot of cardiovascular function that we don't see on the surface. What's really interesting is when we look at how it affects POTS, there's some different theories going into this. And one is the laxity of the blood vessels and the autonomic dysregulation can contribute to POTS, can contribute to these struggles with our heart pumping and our blood pressure. We look at MCAS and we see that connective tissue abnormalities can play a role with developing MCAS and how the mast cells and the immune response kind of have this intricate balance with each other. We see a huge comorbidity of people with autism spectrum disorder and neurodivergence and ADHD with hypermobility. So we think there's, much more evidence here that there's more genetics at play. And chronic pain. So a lot of people who have mystery pain who were diagnosed for years with fibromyalgia or with just, unexplained pain, or even it can lead to arthritis because, right, you aren't protecting your joints as well because they're hypermobile. Maybe this, if we could get ahead of this and diagnose the hypermobility and work on corrective exercise or physical therapy that's knowledgeable about this, we could kind of get ahead of it and stabilize the joints and decrease the wear and tear to improve health outcomes. I don't have all the answers, but everyone has asked about this so many times. My clients, so many of them have been recently diagnosed with EDS, and then it makes sense. It all falls into place where it's like, oh, that's interesting because don't you also have histamine issues or MCAS? Don't you also have POTS? Don't you also have a fibro diagnosis or a chronic fatigue syndrome diagnosis, or these diagnoses that never quite made sense and now they have a genetic component because a lot of EDS cases are confirmed when you finally get to go to a geneticist after suspecting this for so long. So I don't know. I find it super interesting. I think we're on the precipice of this big jump where we're going to see a huge leap, and all of a sudden the genetic door is going to swing open, and we're going to start seeing a lot of these questions of mystery chronic health conditions and mystery chronic pain being explained. And I think the hypermobility genes might be a big part of this as well. It also talks about what I think is how it relates to brain retraining and neuroplasticity, is it acknowledges that there is a huge interconnectedness between bodies, systems, and how they all interrelate. So what we want to look at is how do we manage this, right? So a lot of what I think is interesting is there are corrective exercise specialists. One of my clients, and I watch this lady all the time, I think her name's Tracy Rodriguez. If I am saying her name wrong, let me know, but she is all over YouTube and Facebook, and she has corrective exercise programs to help with hypermobility, ADHD, autism. So I have a client using her program right now. It seems really cool. And it stabilizes joints. We reduce the risk of injury. We strengthen the muscles that are supposed to be doing the work, because sometimes over time with chronic pain, we put those muscles offline and other muscles kind of try to take over, and we end up with pain and tension. We have to look at the autonomic nervous system component here. So brain retraining comes in here, where with hypermobility, especially vascular hypermobility syndromes and POTS, we know that there's an autonomic nervous system dysregulation issue. And so that's something that we know that brain retraining can help with. We also look at this immune system piece, immune system modulation when it comes to MCAS. We know that stress reduction helps. We know that understanding epigenetics and how environmental triggers factor into our genetic expression is going to impact our immune system. And then we look at some neurodevelopmental support here. So how many of us maybe in this brain retraining community that suffer from unexplained mystery diagnoses, maybe we didn't realize before, but have we ever considered that maybe there's neurodivergence also playing in, whether it's ADHD or executive functioning issues or autism spectrum disorder, or any range of mental or emotional issues that might be coming up? Maybe that explains why our brain is more adapt to getting stuck in negative feedback loops. If there's a neurological component, a thought-based component, an executive functioning component. And maybe that's why some of the cognitive and thought-based treatments of brain retraining are more helpful for people with these disorders. Then we tie in pain management. We have to tie in this mind-body connection of just looking at the stress and the impact of being in pain, and people with hypermobility that were never diagnosed and being told it was all in their head or not getting that validation. Now we look at how do we use tools that we can be in control of. So mindfulness and meditation and therapy and time in nature and deep breathing, and how do we reduce the stress but hold space for ourselves and know that healing is possible, and understand that our limbic system, our nervous system might be, stuck in that fight or flight mode because we've been feeling gaslit by our medical providers for so long, right? There's so much that goes into this, and that's why I wanted to just, explore how the nervous system factors in and how hypermobility factors in. I find it to be something where we're talking about it more, but we're still not seeing the recognition in the medical community that we wish we would. It reminds me a little bit of kind of this idea of you see it on a grassroots level before you see it accepted by mainstream science. And I think the more we can facilitate these conversations, like I said, I'm not an expert by any means. There are so many amazing professionals out there that really get the EDS and hypermobility connection. But again, in brain retraining, our goal is not to be symptom focused. We don't want to obsess over this. We don't want to feel worse and obsess over, oh my God, I'm hypermobile, so I'm just going to be sick forever, and go down that over-identification with the diagnosis rabbit hole. But we want to make sure we're looking at the full picture. So if we're like, oh, no, my doctor said I just have chronic pain, I just have to do mindfulness to address my chronic pain, and then we never realize maybe we're hypermobile, and so part of our treatment should be using braces and supports and having a corrective exercise specialist that understands hypermobility. We're never going to recover on the brain side if we don't have someone coaching us and guiding us to do the exercises in a safe way, or to regulate our our entire system that actually needs support, and we're just going to keep running into a brick wall if we send someone with hypermobility undiagnosed to physical therapy to address their POTS symptoms by getting back into exercise, and then they keep feeling injured and hurt and they're in pain and now they don't want to do it. Maybe we're missing the bigger picture. So I think it still is important, even within our community where we're not wanting to get too bogged down on identifying with a diagnosis, we do want to be aware of where all of the puzzle pieces so we have the tools we need to heal. So by engaging in these practices, we are helping with this complex web of our nervous system and reticular activating system and our amygdala. And, I think it's just so important that we, understand how they're all connected and these intricacies and how they go together. And to have support from other people, to know that you're not alone. This isn't in your head. This is something that's becoming increasingly talked about. And what are some other ways that we can support conversation and open dialogue around people being like, oh yeah, me too. Like, I totally have this hypermobility thing. No one ever connected that to my POTS. And then this person with POTS saying, yeah. And I always thought it was weird because every time they put me in physical therapy, I got worse pain and I couldn't finish it. And then the other person coming out and saying, yeah. And what was interesting is emotionally, I was never able to cope with the stressors the same way I felt like they expected me to because maybe I'm neurodivergent. So none of those therapies ever worked. If we don't have these larger conversations, then we're not going to be effective in brain retraining because we're not actually understanding this complexity of it. So I hope this answered some questions. It was very open-ended. I think there's a lot more we can talk about here. Let me know in the comments below if any of this was helpful to you, if you have any of these kind of spider web intricacies going on together. I'd love to hear more about it. I hope you guys have a great day full of healing. I'll talk to you soon.